In this lecture, we are going to add a feature that will enhance the user experience. Tell me if this has ever happened to you. You're filling out a form, and suddenly you accidentally hit the back button, or you swiped in the wrong direction. Your device may register this as wanting to navigate away from the page. When you come back to the form, it's entirely empty. You will have to fill it out again. This type of accident is more common than you think. It's a very annoying thing to experience. There are a lot of apps that are fixing this by asking the user if they're sure about navigating to a different page. We can implement a similar feature with navigation guards. Navigation guards allow us to perform an action before the user navigates to the next page. There's a navigation guard we can add to our components that will be fired before a user navigates away to another page. We will use this navigation guard to ask the user if they're sure about their action. We will be working in the Manage Component file. Open it in your editor. In the Components configuration options, define a method called BeforeRouteLeave. The BeforeRouteLeave navigation guard runs whenever the router is moving away from the current component. This gives us the opportunity to stop the router from leaving the page if the user is filling out a form. It can accept the usual parameters to, from, and next. The first thing we need to do is detect if a user is filling out a form. There isn't a point in stopping the user from navigating away from the page if they haven't made changes to their songs. We will create a data property for keeping track of any edits to the songs. In the data object, add a property called unsavedFlag. Its value will be false. It's going to hold a Boolean value. If it's true, we should attempt to stop the user from navigating away. This property should be updated whenever the values change in any of the songs. The data property is stored in the Manage component, but the fields are in the Composition item component. We're going to do what we did last time. We will create a function for modifying the value in the Manage component. This function will be passed down to the Composition item component. It'll be able to call this function whenever the inputs change. Let's define the method. In the Manage Components options, we will define a method called updateUnsavedFlag. This method will have one parameter called value. The value parameter will be used for the unsavedFlag property. In the function, we are going to set the unsavedFlag data property to the value argument. Our function is ready. Let's pass it on to the Composition item component. Above, in the template, we are going to bind a property called updateUnsavedFlag. We will bind this to the updateUnsavedFlag method. The Composition item component will need to accept the function as a prop. We will switch over to this component. Scroll down to the props object we created earlier. We will add onto the object by adding the updateUnsavedFlag prop. The type option will be configured to function. We're not going to add the required prop because it won't be necessary for this function to be available. We will make it optional. The next step is to call this function whenever the fields are updated. In the template, we have two fields. They both should call this function whenever they're updated. We can add the input event listener to the vField components. After all, the field component will generate an input. The properties we add to this component will be passed on to the element it generates. We can add event listeners to detect changes to the field. We'll start with the text field for the song title. We will add an input event listener to the field component. We will run the updateUnsavedChanges function. This function expects a value. We will pass in true. This event listener will be the same for the genre field. We will copy and paste it over to the other field component. The input event is fired whenever the value for the field changes. This will let us become aware of unsaved changes. But what if the user saves their changes? We should turn the flag off. In our composition item component, we have a function that will handle the form submission called edit. At the end of this function, after we've confirmed the submission was a success, we will call the update unsaved changes again. This time we will pass in false to turn the flag off. We've created a flag for storing the status of the user's edits. If it's true, they have unsaved changes. We should prevent them from navigating away from the page. Let's handle that next. Back in the Manage component, we are going to update the beforeRouteLeave function. We will add a conditional statement that will check if the this.unsaved flag is false. If it's false, we'll know there aren't unsaved changes. We can proceed to let the user navigate to the next page. We don't always want to prevent them from navigating away if there isn't a reason to hold them on the same page. Inside this conditional block, we will call the next function. The next function will allow the router to proceed. If the user has unsaved changes, we should ask them if they're sure about leaving. After the conditional statement, we will add an else block. Inside this block, we will create a variable called leave. Its value will be the confirm function. The confirm function will produce a prompt. The user will be given two options to proceed with their action or cancel their action. It'll return a Boolean value we can store in a variable. We can customize the message in the prompt by passing in a string. Our prompt will say the following: "You have unsaved changes. Are you sure you want to leave?" ESLint may throw an error because the confirm function is considered an alert function. The rules we have installed disallow this function. However, we will need it for this one scenario. We don't want to disable a rule on a global level. Luckily, ESLint can be disabled for specific lines. If I hover my mouse over the confirm function, we will be shown the rules that are broken. We can select the Quick Fix option to disable these rules for this line. We are going to select the Disable option for the No Alert rule. A comment will appear above the line. This won't do anything to our program. ESLint will detect this line and avoid applying the No Alert rule to the line. In addition, there's another rule that will be broken called No Restricted Globals. This rule enforces that we shouldn't use global variables. The confirm function is a global function defined by the browser. We will want to disable this rule too. We can add it by adding a comma followed by the name of the rule. I don't always recommend disabling rules. We should always adhere to a standard. For this situation, it's perfectly fine. The confirm function will return a Boolean value. We are going to pass this value on to the next function. The next function has one optional argument. We can pass in a Boolean value to tell the router whether to proceed with the navigation. If we pass in false, it's the same as not calling the function. A true Boolean value will tell the router to move on to the next page. Let's try testing our new feature. In the browser, refresh the Manage page. If I browse to another route, nothing happens. That's the behavior we want originally. This time around, I will edit a field without saving it. If I were to navigate to a different page, I will be prompted about my attempt. It'll ask if I'm sure about navigating away from the page with unsaved changes. If I click Cancel, I will remain on the page. We're officially finished with the Manage page. The user is able to upload, edit, and delete their music. The feature we've added is optional, but it's a great way to enhance user experience. Users will no longer have to worry about accidentally leaving the page with unsaved changes. We'll continue working on the application in the next few sections.